Good evening and welcome, fellow opera lovers. I'm Peggy Hill, Vice President of Chapters with San Francisco Opera Guild, and also I'm on the Previews Committee. Our co-host this evening is John Morris, who handles all the tech stuff and will also be taking your questions for our guests. Look for the Q&A little button to select your questions, to write down your questions. Michael Bragg, our preview speaker, is currently Music Planning Associate and Music Librarian for the San Francisco Opera. He received his Bachelor of Music degree from Westminster Choir College and his Master's from Cleveland Institute of Music. Some fun facts about Michael. He sang for many years, and including going on a national tour in 2005 of a program titled A Christmas Spectacular, featuring Denise Graves and Andrea Bocelli. Michael has been in over 200 performances of Porgy and Bess as Mingo and has made his opera debuts with Los Angeles Opera, San Francisco Opera, the Lyric Opera of Chicago, Seattle Opera, and along with several European houses. He has sung at the Metropolitan Opera in several performances, many Wagnerian, and of course, he made his debut at Carnegie Hall. And with that, welcome and looking forward to Michael Bragg. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Peggy, for that wonderful introduction. It's always weird to hear all of your credits being read aloud, but it always reminds me of how lucky and fortunate I have been able to do a performance career, and now I have the wonderful opportunity to be a lecturer and a librarian and get to be behind the scenes. So thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Bragg, and just to give you a little bit more about my history, I have been in this position as the librarian since 2015. And one of the wonderful things that I get to do as part of my job is operating the super titles for many of the performances here at San Francisco Opera. And one of the shows that I'm actually working on with the super titles is Dialogues of the Carmelites. So I am deeply involved with this show. So when John and Peggy approached me to do a lecture about this particular piece, I jumped at the chance. This was one of my first operas I was ever in as a young budding tenor. I got to play the role of the brother in this opera, which we will talk about. In just a few minutes, we'll get started. This piece has been a part of my life since I was 23, 22, so at least over 20 years now. So I love this piece. I hope that you will love this piece at the end of this lecture as much as I do. And I hope that at the end of this, if you haven't got your tickets, that you will be impressed to buy tickets to go see this show that's happening in a couple weeks. In a week. So without further ado, let me share my screen here and we can talk about some Dialogues of the Carmelites. Okay, go. So, Dialogues of the Carmelites by Francis Poulenc, with a text and of the drama of George Bernanos, adapted to a lyric opera with the authorization of Emmett Lavery, the drama inspired by a novel of Gertrude von Lefort, and a scenario of Reverend Father Bruckberger and Philippe Augustini. Now, the reason why I am reading all of that aloud is because when Poulenc was writing this piece, there was an issue with the rights, and so we're going to talk about that later on with this piece and how it was its inception. So, Dialogues of the Carmelites is actually one that is a story that is based in history, and it is a story about the martyrs of Compagnie. On 17 July 1794, 16 members of the Carmel de Compagnie, France, were found guilty for having hostility towards the revolution, having strong sympathies for the monarchy, and evidence that they continued to live as a community of consecrated women, and were sentenced to die by the guillotine. So this is a true story that happened, and it is said to be one of the first markers to the end of the reign of terror during the French Revolution. And if you can remember that as part of your history, that's when everyone was basically being killed if they were against or opposed the revolution. And so this was one of those moments that actually stopped the revolutionaries, and they said, I think maybe we've gone too far. So now the opera that Francis Poulenc wrote tells this story. Outside, scaffolds rise in city squares as priests, nobles, and political prisoners face the merciless blade of the guillotine. The aristocrat Blanche de la Force had hoped the convent would serve as a sanctuary, but now death is at the sisters' doorstep, and one by one, their faith will be tested. So, the story has a fictional character, Blanche de la Force, who's an aristocratic woman. So, what happens is this particular character allows us to get into a more intimate look at the end of the lives of these nuns. And Blanche de la Force is a character that Francis Poulenc was deeply inspired by. He really felt that he and Blanche had a lot of things in common, which we will talk about as the night progresses. And when Poulenc was approached originally to do this opera, the opera house La Scala in Milan wanted originally him to write a ballet. And, he said to himself, I don't know if dancing nuns are my thing. So he decided that he wanted to, that an opera would be a better way to sort of like have a sacred opera would be better. And what got tossed around was Dialogues of the Carmelites. Now, it had been a play, and Poulenc had seen the play and read the novel, and so he immediately was like, this is a perfect idea. So, this is what he said after he decided to take on the assignment. I bought the book, Dialogues of the Carmelites, and decided to reread it. I sat down at the outdoors cafe, Tre Scalini, on the Piazza Navone. It was 10 in the morning. At noon, I was still there, having consumed a coffee, an ice cream, an orange juice, and a bottle of Fuji mineral water to justify my prolonged presence. At 12:30, I was drunk with enthusiasm, but the final question remained. Would I find the music for such a text? I opened by chance the book and forced myself instantly to translate into music the first sentences I read. As incredible as it may seem, I immediately found the melodic line. Destiny had decided. So, you can see from this that this was a piece that he was super excited and wanted to throw himself fully into. And Poulenc, being a devout Catholic, was drawn to the religious themes in the play and in the story, and the issues of the communion of saints and the transference or the transfer of grace, which is to say, as a community of Christians, of Catholics, one can exchange one's suffering for one another and even one's death. So that is something that he is super interested in, this idea of transference of grace, which is the idea of you can take someone's suffering so that their suffering will be alleviated, and even one's suffering in death. And there is a line that one of the characters says, and it says, "We do not die for ourselves alone, but instead for one another." This is what the martyrs of Compiègne believed that they were doing for all of France when they went to the guillotine so long ago. So, we've got this amazing story. Now, here's a little background on Poulenc. He was born on January 7th, 1899, and died January 30th, 1963. He was the only son of a successful manufacturer and was expected to take over the family business, and although he expressed his interest in music, he wasn't allowed to enroll at music school. So he took matters into his own hands, and he taught himself how to play the piano and compose. So so from that we already know that he's a very determined and person, and music is in his blood. So we always want to remember that as we are talking about this piece and him writing this piece. And when I was researching him, I discovered a book of letters and the correspondence from 1915 to 1963. And I found all of these correspondences that talk about his process and writing this opera. And I thought for tonight it would be really fun to talk about this show and this opera through his letters that he's writing to his friends, his colleagues, people that are in the business that know his work and know him. And so I think that was really interesting to me, and I hope that it will be interesting to you. Now, in August of 1953, when Poulenc started working on dialogues, his life was full of artistic highs and emotional lows. The highs. He had 3 new commissions, 2 piano pieces, and a setting of Ave Verum Corpus text that he actually ends up setting, again, in dialogues. The New York Critics Circle, in the previous year, in 1952, had voted his Stabat Mater Best Choral Work of the Year. And he also was approached to make a recording of his opera, Les Mamelles Tiresias, The Lows. He was in an emotionally charged love affair with a young man named Lucien. Think Antony and Cleopatra. So their affair was tumultuous and high heated. His long-term friend and live-in companion of 20 years moved out to be with his wife. And he had started experiencing headaches and eye problems. And although he would express his exhaustion and stress, he would go on to say that it was the struggle that ignited and fueled his composing. So, let's go on. Let's move on to some letters. So, here we have a letter to his friend and colleague Pierre Bernac. Now, Pierre Bernac was a very famous baritone, and he and Poulenc traveled all over the world, giving recitals and concerts of Poulenc's music, of Debussy's music, of Erik Satie's music, of Mendelssohn's music. So they were deeply, they were what we would call besties. They were best friends, and also just like working musicians who loved to work together. So his first letter that I want to read, dated March 1953. Rome, great fun and full of high society. Now sit down. La Scala has commissioned me to write an opera on Le Dialogue des Carmelites. I said yes, and can think of nothing else. Performances guaranteed La Scala, San Carlo, Cologne, Covent Garden, and Berlin Opera, and perhaps even Paris. So, this piece immediately had a draw, and people were hungry for this piece. So it's crazy to think that he had all of these opera houses immediately sign up for a piece that he hadn't written yet, but he was so excited. So his energy level is up. He is ready to go. He's got pencil and paper in hand. The next letter. This again is to his friend Stéphane Odell. Now, Stéphane Odell was a very famous actor of the time and had been in a couple of performances of the play of Dialogues of the Carmelites. And he says, I am working like a madman. I do not go out. I do not see anyone. All the more so because, unfortunately, I have to go to Paris around the 12th for a recording of Les Mamelles, his opera, his other opera. I am completing one scene a week. I hardly recognize myself. I am crazy about my subject to the point of believing that I have actually known these women. So now the first letter was in March. Here we are in August, late August, the last day of August that he's writing to Stéphane. And he's already writing a scene a week. So from March to August, he's been writing. I mean, he has just been locked away. So he is absolutely obsessed with this piece. And he goes on to say, you will see scene 2 with a prioress and Blanche is astounding in its calmness, severity, peacefulness, and violence. Let's move on to the next letter. Again, a letter to Pierre Bernac. It feels like a very long time. This is September. It feels like a very long time since I've heard from you. Prepare for a shock. In just 2 weeks, I have drafted 3 scenes of Les Dialogues, which I will write next week. I cannot get over this. It just flows and flows. It is like nobody but myself. It is madly vocal. I check each note and I'm careful to place the right notes, or the right vowels on the high notes. Now, one of the things that makes this piece stand out than other operas in the operatic canon is that Poulenc set prose and not a poetic libretto. There's no rhyme scheme in this show. It is the reason why it's called Dialogues of the Carmelites is because it is truly people in conversation. And it is just dialogue. It is a play set to music. And that is its genius and its success. And the reason why he wrote it this way is because in his mind, no matter where the opera was being performed, he wanted it and preferred it to be sung in the vernacular of the country in which it was being played. It was being performed. So it premiered in La Scala in Italy. So the premiere was in Italian. Its next place that it premiered was in Paris, where it was in French, and then the American premiere of the piece was here at San Francisco Opera in 1957 and was sung in English. So we have a piece that is meant to be literally understood in any language that it is heard in. So think about how hard it is to make language and music work no matter what language it's sung in. So that is a very difficult thing to do, but what he did was absolute genius, which is why we still continue to do this piece 50 years later, more than 50 years later. Let's go on to some more letters. So here we have September 1953. Sorry. Yes. So, now, one of the things that that Poulenc was really worried about was writing an opera with almost no men voices, no male voices. There's only a handful of men, and the rest is all women. And it's hard in an opera to really hear difference in character. So he writes to Francis, and he writes to Pierre and asks, what should I do with these women's voices? And so Pierre writes back, I've been giving a lot of thought to the characters in dialogues and to the color of their voices. The first prioress should be a contralto. The problem then, which a contralto is the lowest of the female voices. The problem then is to have enough variation in color and tessitura between the second prioress and Mother Marie. So that's the three main characters. There are four main characters. Let's see, Mother Marie, Constance, Blanche, new prioress, old prioress. So there are five major women in the show that take up the majority of the action. And so he's talking about these characters. The problem then is to have enough variation in color and tessitura between the second prioress and Mother Marie. I understood you were making the second prioress a lyric soprano. Think Aida or Mimi. So he's thinking about these characters via a Puccini or Verdi heroine, right? Now you speak of making Mother Marie another lyric soprano, a little dry, something like Danko. Now, Danko was a soprano who was very famous for her largest instrument and for her very stoic way of character. That is all very well, but personally, I feel you will not have enough contrast with Denise's voice. Now, Denise Duval is a woman and a soprano that Poulenc wrote many, many songs for, and the opera that is being recorded around the same time as he's writing this, she was the premier soprano in that piece. So he's writing Blanche with Denise Duval's voice in mind. So I feel you will not have enough contrast with Denise's voice, which to my mind is also a dry lyric soprano. This is why I continue to hear Mother Marie either as a mezzo or a dramatic soprano. Bear in mind that you are depriving yourself for the entire second act of any possibility of low tessitura, because we're talking about almost an entire show with no men, so it's all high voices. These three women are all very different. Will be singing in exactly the same tessitura, so the same range, because of the dialogue, that the idea that people are just speaking and having conversation. Most of the music is in the same range, tessitura. I cannot help thinking that Vita, who is also a Wagnerian soprano of the time, would once have made a perfect Mother Marie, both physically and vocally, given a true high register. So that was Pierre to Francis. Now, Francis writes back and he says, as usual, and it gets to be quite irritating, you are right. Of course, Mother Marie must be written for a mezzo, so Act 2 will then have Constance, light soprano, second prioress, lyric soprano, Blanche, soprano, Mother Marie, mezzo. What confused me at first was Scene 4, Death of the Old Prioress, where contralto and mezzo come face to face. Apart from this scene, the only one where the two women confront each other, Mother Marie has only responses. The first scene is completely finished. He finished it. So from March to this is September 1, he's already finished a scene. I am about to copy it out. I am relying on your coming here for the weekend of September 20, when I will play, I hope, scenes 1 and 2 for you. So, now we're going to get into some music. So, remember he said, I've already drafted 3 scenes in a letter that he had written maybe in August or something. And so, we're going to go and listen to these 3 scenes now. So, the opera opens with Blanche's father and brother, the Marquis and the Chevalier de la Force, talking about the general unrest in France and their worries about Blanche at a time when crowds stop carriages in the streets and aristocrats are attacked. The pathologically timid Blanche decides to retreat from the world and enter a Carmelite nun, where she thinks she's going to be safe from harm. Now, here in this, what we're going to be listening to, here we're going to hear Blanche asking permission from her father to join the convent. He is concerned and thinks she's renouncing the world out of spite. She explains that she bears no ill to the world, but cannot take or bear the noise and constant fear. So let's listen to that. So this, what you're going to listen to, is the original cast in 1957 at La Scala. So you're going to hear Blanche as Virginia Zeani and the Marquis de la Force, Scipio Colombo. So let's go to the second scene. So now so over the course of this evening, we're going to hear this opera in 3 languages: Italian, French, and English. And so what I want to impress upon you is to listen to this music and really listen to how he's setting the music and how the language doesn't change how we hear the music, because how he set the text so brilliantly. So, second scene. Now, the second scene is this. We remember that this is the scene that inspired him to write the first notes of this opera. So this scene is very important to him. And in this scene, Blanche goes to the convent to ask to join the order. The Mother Superior, or old prioress, informs her that the Carmelite order is not a refuge. It is the duty of the nuns to guard the order, not the other way around. Here we hear the prioress ask if Blanche has chosen a name by which to be referred to. So in when you become a nun, you become Sister so-and-so, of such and such. And so Blanche says yes, and that she's chosen the name Sister Blanche of the Agony of Christ. Now, this is significant because this refers to the moment that Christ felt human fear. So this pathologically timid and fearful woman has attached herself to when Christ had first felt fear. So let's listen to this. Now, what's significant and what we find out later is that the old prioress, or what you will see here is the Madame de Coissy character, or the Mother Superior character, when she became a nun 30 years ago, she too was sister of the agony of Christ. So she and Blanche, she has a connection to Blanche, and that connection is a very important connection when we get to scene 4, which we will talk about soon enough. But let's move on to scene 3. So, in this scene, in this scene, we are introduced to the character Constance, who's a young nun. Okay. We're having some technical difficulties here. So in this third scene, we meet the young nun Constance, who is full of energy and has had a dream that she and Blanche will die together. This vexes Blanche for many reasons. And Constance apologizes and asks for forgiveness. So this is that scene. Good stuff. So, let's move on to some more letters. Now, these next letters deal with scene 4. And this is a very, very important scene in the opera. And it concerns the death of the old prioress. So here is a letter that Francis sent to a music critic and music and literary critic friend of his named Henri L. He goes, I am delighted with my setup in Lausanne, where I am living like a prince. I started working at once on scene 4 of dialogues. I picked up the thread again immediately and am happy. This scene moves further and further away from recitative, which means it is more, there's more melody, more actual singing lines, that it's less like dialogues. This scene, as the action is already underway and the exposition completed, the music can at last take over. This is why it is impossible to perceive the architecture of the work from the first scenes. Now, the next letter is to Pierre Bernard, and he says, Ouf, mon petit Pierre, she breathed her last at 7 o'clock last night after a most horrible death struggle. So he's talking about the old prioress. Mother Marie, more ambitious than ever, was unbelievably hard. Poor Blanche, completely crazed, and that great ninny of a doctor, totally silent. As for me, I am exhausted but very relieved at having completed the entire scene here. So again, he started working on this opera in March, and now he has completed 4 scenes, 4 big scenes in 6-7 months, which is impressive. That's an impressive thing. Let's see. It is definitely the most beautiful. You will see with orchestra it will be thrilling, and vocally one can just let oneself go. While the prioress is on her death throes, there is a small phrase of Mother Marie's from which I am expecting quite a lot. The final note of the prioress is a high A, fortissimo and very dry. Then it is all over. I'm going to take a little breather before the 5th scene, so as to clear the air of all the rest. I am not allowing myself to look back and never replay the first scenes. The rhythm of the death of the prioress will be the same as the last scene of Act 1, but serene and celestial. This is the crux of the whole play. So, let's talk about this scene, because it really does sort of encapsulate a lot of what this opera is about. And so in this scene, the prioress is on her deathbed. Mother Marie accepts charge of Blanche from the prioress, who advises firmness, judgment, and character, qualities she says Blanche lacks. She requests Blanche's presence and offers her own death to avert the dangers facing Blanche. So this is the first time we get a sense of this transfer of grace. And remember that both the old prioress and Blanche are sisters of the agony of Christ. So they're already so the old prioress, who is on her deathbed and is questioning, why is this happening? Why am I suffering so much? And then she decides, this is my suffering. I'm taking this on. This is a transfer of grace, so that Blanche, who is so troubled by her fear, cannot have to suffer like that. And that is an important thing to remember when we get to the end of the opera. So, let's watch this scene. Now, this is the last sort of 2 minutes of her death scene. And now this is from the Australian opera 1984, So this will be sung in English. So I still want you to hear how this piece is no different now that you're hearing it in English than in Italian, which we just heard. So, there we have the death scene. And if you haven't bought tickets to see this show, this scene in the production that we are presenting at San Francisco Opera is... I was in rehearsal on Saturday night, and I wept. I was in the booth, I was doing the super titles, and I'm just weeping. It is so powerful of a scene, and it's a really lovely way to, again, see this idea of a community of people who are taking on the suffering for one another, which is, again, the crux of this piece, like Poulenc says, is this idea, is in this scene. So, we're going to move on. As the music is pouring out of him, his professional and personal life would be something less than desirable. When Poulenc began composing dialogues, he and his publishers were unaware of a legal dispute over the exclusive rights for all adaptations of Gertrude von Lefort's novella. This would keep him from composing from March of 1954 to August of 1953. Also, his love affair with Lucien was putting a strain on his emotional and physical health, and he decided to take a break from the relationship. So I'm going to read a letter that he wrote to Pierre about this time in his life and this the issue with Lucien and the issue with writing this opera. Many people do not understand me, but I know that you do. Yes, you are right. I have indeed poisoned myself little by little. Too much introspection, emotional as well as intellectual, has been gnawing away at me for months. But can one prevent a lame man from limping? And yes, life has spoiled me in many ways, but do not forget a certain drama that has been obsessing me for the past 8 years, my consuming love for Lucien, which far from abating only seems to grow more intense, my limitless affection for Raymond. Now Raymond, remember Raymond is the gentleman who he had been living with for the past 20 years that just had moved out to be with his new wife. When in April it became certain, something I knew and even wanted, that Raymond would soon move to the town of Noisy, and when, in addition, I believed Lucien to be more distant, I fell into a blind panic that was not helped at all by worries about my liver, about my faith, about the Fon-Lefort-Bernanos obstruction, which means that I may be writing a work that can never be performed, and that I may not be able to sign up with recording. So this is a gentleman who literally for the last 7-8 months of his life has been pouring himself into this piece, and now all of a sudden has been told he may not be able to ever finish this piece. Now, I mean, I equate this to saying when an athlete is injured and all they want to do is play their sport. So all he wants to do is write this opera that he is so involved in his emotions and he is physically sick because he cannot continue to write this piece that he is absolutely loves and adores. So now, before Poulenc had stopped composing, he had already written and orchestrated over half of the opera. Now, the opera is 3 acts in 12 scenes. And so he had written already, by the time he realized that he had to stop writing, he had written 7 of the 12 scenes. So he only had 5 more scenes left to write. Now imagine that's like getting to, 98 bottles of beer on the wall, and then you're like, you know what, I can't sing the other 2 bottles of beer. So this is where he is. So we're going to listen to a couple of the last scenes that he was able to write before he had to stop. Now, in this next scene, we see Sister Constance. This is after the death of the old prioress. And Sister Constance remarks to Blanche that the prioress's death seemed unworthy of her, and speculates that she had been given the wrong death, as one might be given the wrong coat in a cloakroom. She said perhaps someone else will find death surprisingly easy. Now remember, when the old prioress is dying, she basically says, I'm going to die so that you and suffer so that you don't have to. And Constance later says, perhaps we die not for ourselves alone, but instead for each other. And so here is this scene. Now, this scene, what we're going to watch, these 2 next clips, are actually going to be sung in French. So again, I'm impressed upon you to let your ears just listen to this music and how it works in every language that we've heard today. Now, to me, all of this sounds so beautiful in any of these languages, which again, every time I listen to this piece, no matter what language I'm listening, it works. It absolutely works no matter what language you're listening to. Okay, so now this next scene is the last scene that he wrote before he had to stop composing. And in this scene, this is Blanche's brother arrives at the convent to announce that their father thinks Blanche should withdraw from the convent since she is not safe there, being both an aristocrat and a member of the religious community at a time of anti-aristocracy and anti-clericalism in the rising revolutionary tides. Blanche refuses, saying that she has found happiness in the Carmelite order. So, in this scene, you will see not just a woman grappling with her own fear, but a woman also who's having to make the decision to separate herself from her family, to be a part of something that is bigger than herself. So, after her brother leaves, after she says, "I'm happy here, and I am not afraid anymore," he leaves, and she admits to Mother Marie that is fear of fear that has kept her in the convent. Otherwise, she would have escaped long time ago, because she is so afraid of everything. So, now, sorry, excuse me. Now, depression set in because of the ongoing copyright dispute, but Poulenc was determined to finish this work. Remember, he had to stop writing from March of 54 to August of 55. But he was determined to finish this work, and he decided to go see the man with whom the rights of his opera belonged. Now, when I was doing my research, I found a letter that the gentleman wrote about Emmett Lavery is the gentleman's name, who owned the rights, the exclusive rights to the novella. And I found this letter that he had written about his experience meeting Poulenc when Poulenc basically went to him and said, "Hey, what's the deal? Can I do this opera?" So this is October of 1954. I never had any argument with Francis Poulenc. In fact, we became good friends in the all too short time period he died. It was 54 when I caught up with him in Paris, quite by accident. Dialogues was running strong as a play. I had just won my arbitration, and Poulenc was halfway through his opera based on the Bernanos materials. What to do? I could have stopped all the work on the opera, but what good would that have served? Let's see. I liked Poulenc on sight, and we had friends in common. All is well that ends well if you know a gentleman like Poulenc. So, Emmett Lavery literally, basically, once he met Poulenc, said, "You know what? I don't know what your piece is. I don't know what it sounds like, but you know what? You seem to be determined that you want to write this piece, and it is of great priority to you." And so he said, "Yes, I will give you the go ahead to finish your opera." Now, although Lavery gave permission to Poulenc, the dispute lasted more than 6 months. In February of 1955, Lucien was diagnosed with cancer. Poulenc again was at his side and had him hospitalized in Caen. Poulenc wrote to the Carmel of Compagnie to pray for Lucien. Now, I did find another letter, which I think is really interesting, and he wrote to the Carmelite nuns of Compagnie, who were the same sect of nuns that were beheaded in 1794. And this is what he writes to them. This is October 1954. I take the liberty of writing to you because I believe that you are not unaware of the fact that I have just completed an opera based on Bernanos' Dialogues of the Carmelites. After many problems of health and other kinds, I have been able to complete this work to the glory of your order. At least I hope it to be so. I am grateful for this to Providence, and especially for the protection of the blessed Carmelites of Compagnie. Today it is their intercession that I ask you to implore through the voice of your sisters for a friend incurably ill who is dying without knowing the nature of his illness and without too much suffering. This friend has always been passionately interested in my work, which, alas, he will never see staged. I thought that you would not find my request indiscreet, and that is why, Reverend Mother, I dare hope that you will grant it. Francis Poulenc. The name of my sick friend, a fervent Catholic, is Lucien Roubert. Now, so Lucien was someone of great stress and love to Poulenc, and this piece represented a lot of his relationship to Lucien. So now we're going to listen to two more scenes, and then we'll be finished. Now, in this scene, in the absence of the new prioress, Mother Marie proposes that the nuns take a vow of martyrdom. However, all must agree, or Mother Marie will not insist. A secret vote is held. There is one dissenting voice, Sister Constance. She declares that she was the dissenter, and that she has changed her mind, so the vow can proceed. At that moment, Blanche runs away from the convent. Now, in history, The nuns did take a vow of martyrdom, except they were taking the vow not for themselves, but literally as a symbol of martyrdom for the whole of France. So this scene is a very poignant scene because in this scene, you get to see what actually happened in history. So, now, as Poulenc was writing the final scene of the opera where the nuns meet their fate by the guillotine, Lucien was meeting his. And in the last letter that I will read today, it is a letter from Francis Poulenc to Pierre Bernac where he talks about this. He talks about his relationship with Lucien and the importance of it to this opera. I have entrusted him to my 16 blessed Carmelites. May they protect his final hours, since he has been so closely involved with their story. In fact, I began the work at his side in happiness in Lyon in August 1953. After all the torment, which I need not describe to you, I have just finished the work at his side during the last days of his earthly life. As I wrote to you once before, I am haunted by Bernano's phrase, "We do not die for ourselves alone, but for, or instead of, each other." If Raymond remains the secret of Les Mamelles and Figures Humaines, Lucien is certainly that of the Stabat Mater and Les Carmelites. So, you see that Poulenc not only loved this piece, but saw a lot of parallels to his own life while he was writing it and to characters in the story. And so I impress upon you to listen through Poulenc's ears what he was going through while he's writing this piece. Now, the last scene that we're gonna hear is the final scene, in which gave Poulenc a lot of stress and anxiety, because how do you kill beautifully 16 people by the guillotine? And so this was a back and forth, and he didn't know what to do. And we don't have time right now to listen to the entire scene, but this, to my recollection, is the first piece that ever uses a guillotine sound in it to represent this guillotine at this moment, especially in an opera. And so we're going to listen to a little bit of it right now. So now I will say this, that last scene of the opera is actually what happened in truth, in life. So the day that the nuns were carted from the jail to the guillotine, as they rode through the streets of France, of Compagnie, they sang all manner of liturgical music. And one of those pieces was the Salve Regina. So that, when you watch this opera, you are watching history played out. And this is why I love this piece, because it's not only an amazing opera, but every time you watch it, you get to relive what happened in our life, as a human society. We get to see this played out in the most beautiful, human, humble way. So there you have it. There is Dialogues of the Carmelites. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I think we are ready for maybe some Q&A.
Bravo, Michael. Thank you so much. Such a fascinating presentation. And I'll speak for myself. I did not know very much about this opera before this season, and I feel like I know so much more just from your presentation, which is
Thank you.
fabulous. So thank you.
Thank you.
We've had some great questions come in. I want to say thank you to our audience. We're going to now shift gears to Q&A. I'm John Morris, Education Program Manager with the Opera Guild. And so we'll just jump right into the Q&A. Ro asks, who were the singers in the San Francisco premiere in 1957?
Okay. So those singers were very famous Leontine Price, who played the second prioress. She made her debut here at our company in 1957. Regine Crespin was the old prioress. And then I have to remember who the Blanche de la Fosse. Give me 1 second and I will look this up really, really quickly. But also a very, very famous soprano of the time. And her name is escaping me, but we have this wonderful thing at San Francisco Opera, which is our database. And so I can look it up right now. Give me 1 second. Here we go, cast page. So we have Dorothy Kirsten. The very famous American soprano Dorothy Kirsten was the Blanche. And the Constance was Sylvia Stahlmann, who I don't know that voice, but those were the big heavy hitters of that our first premiere, which then when they came back and we did it in 1982, which was the last time we have done this piece, both Regine Crespin and Leontine Price reprised their roles for us here.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peggy asks, your thoughts about the cast members of this current San Francisco Opera production?
Ooh, okay, so I was just talking about that today with a colleague. And so we have Heidi Stober, who has been with the company many, many times. She is the Blanche. Deanna Braywick is new to our company. She is going to be the Constance. She's fabulous. Heidi, of course, has been on our stage a number of times, so I've seen her in many things, and when she was cast, I was like, this makes sense. Yeah, she's going to be great. Then we have Michaela Schuster, who plays the old prioress, who's making her role. Everyone in our production, it is a new role for them. So it's exciting because you get to see all of these people take on roles that they will then get to develop over the years of them doing this piece. Then we have Michelle Bradley as the second prioress, who I have to say, I adore this woman. She was originally supposed to be here for her first role in Ernani, and then of course COVID hit, and we had to sit down for a minute. But we're so excited to have her back in the house and in this role. And then we have Melody Moore as Mother Marie. And I have to say, she is a powerhouse of a singer, and every time she gets on that stage, it is. I mean, everyone is so perfectly cast. I think Poulenc, if he were to come back, would say, "This is how I would cast this show." So it's exciting.
Fabulous. Thank you for that rundown. Sounds like we need to run, don't walk.
Yes.
Peggy also asked about if there are any unusual difficulties working with the super titles. And I'm actually curious about the super titles as well. You mentioned that you're in the booth, and do you mind just sharing a little bit more about how you put together the super titles, that process,
Sure.
how long
So
that takes? Yeah.
yeah, so what usually happens is, so this isn't a production that we built, so it's not ours. We are renting it. So what happens is usually you rent the super title materials from the company that originated the production. So that's exactly what we did. So it made my job easier because then all I have to do is take that material and put it into our system. Now, then, of course, things get tweaked as the director and the conductor and people get involved in how they want to, certain words get changed or how we actually cue those titles, so how the titles actually come up or down. So it's an important way of watching the piece unfold is how you read it, because it's important to understand that when you're reading it, it's like like for instance, if you're doing a show and it's got super titles and it's a comedy like Marriage of Figaro or Barbara of Seville or something, you have to make sure that the joke doesn't land before the joke lands. So it's a very complicated situation, and it's a two-person operation. So I'm the artistic side, and then there's someone else who's in the booth who presses a button that I tell them. So I'm in charge of, I will actually show you a score. Give me 1 second. So this is the score to Dialogues of the Carmelites, and this is what it looks like. So each one of these gets a little you put in the title, and then each one gets a little cue mark. You can see that there. And so I call those cues, and then someone presses that button.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's a little bit of arts and crafts that has to go into this because I have to make a new score for every show that we do. It's quite a process.
thank you. That's very insightful and interesting. And I have a question for you, which is you mentioned that you played the role of the brother.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what that experience was like for you and sort of what insight it gave you into the opera and how that production was different from this production and
Sure. So I was 22 when I played for the first time I ever played this role, and of course, I knew nothing about the piece until I was cast, and so I just dove right in and did all the reading and research and listened to every recording I could possibly think. And what I love about this opera, and particularly this role, is that even though he's in only 2 scenes, you really get a chance to play out a lot of familial struggle, because he's an older brother who's protecting his very delicate sister, and that his music, the duet that they have in that 7th scene, is some of the most romantic music in the opera, because there is no romance in the opera. There's no love interest. It is an opera that has 0 love triangles or people of crime of passions or any of that. And that was a concern of Poulenc when he was like writing this piece. He was like, are people going to want to watch a show that doesn't have any kind of like love triangle or love interest? But the love of a brother and sister comes shining through in a way that the music encapsulates, and you get to see a real a moment of growing up with the two of them, where they're all of a sudden you're like, oh, we're no longer the same people. We've grown apart. We have different goals in life. We have different aspirations in life. And so it's, even though again, it's only 2 scenes, you get to really go dig deep into like a lot of the psychological family stuff, which is great.
Thank you. And as you mentioned earlier in your presentation too, notable that it's one of, only a few male characters.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I also just want to comment that I really appreciated how you threaded the letters throughout your presentation because it gave that primary source and it felt like, Poulenc's voice was present,
Right.
which I think really, really gave this
Thank you.
an interesting dynamic aspect.
So, like, if I can sort of talk a little bit more about that, the reason why I decided to do it that way is because every book that I was reading about Poulenc or on this subject referred to letters,
Uh-huh.
referred to some of these letters, and I thought, I got to find this book. I got to find this book of letters because it just seemed like everyone was so influenced by his own words when they were writing other materials about him. And so I thought, I want to see what he has to say about this piece,
Absolutely. Yeah, and who better to speak to it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, Poulenc himself. Wonderful. It looks like we just had another comment come in from Kathy. She says, "Thank you for a very interesting, creative, and enlightening presentation. I can hardly wait to see this performance on Saturday."
I'll be
Yes.
there.
With the super titles.
Exactly.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, it looks like that is our last comment and question. So I'm going to welcome Peggy Hill back to the virtual stage. Peggy is our VP of Chapters, Marin Chapter President, and Opera Previews Coordinator to close things out for us. Thank you, Peggy.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael Bragg, and also John for your great organization of this program. And the opera Dialogues of the Carmelites will run from October 15th through October 30th. So get those tickets. But if you can't attend live, thank goodness the opera is now doing live streaming of every single opera. And this one will be live streamed Friday, October 21st, 7:30 p.m., $27.50. And just when you get on the San Francisco Opera website, look for that word live stream. Also, we're going to have a couple more previews during this fall. And Wednesday, November 9th at 6 p.m., La Traviata with Kip Crana. And then Thursday, November 10th, 6 p.m. with Orpheus and Eurydice, with Rebecca Plack. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Time to go have a little dessert, dinner, whatever, glass of wine, and hope to see you again at our next preview. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.